It was Christmas Eve, and the house smelled like it always had pine needles, coffee, and something my late wife used to bake that I never quite learned to replicate. I stood at the kitchen window watching the snow come down in the backyard, slow and deliberate, covering everything in white. I was 68 years old. I had built this house with my own hands, or at least the idea of it. Every room held a memory I could touch if I reached out far enough. My son and his wife were due to arrive at 6. I had set the table for 3. Good plates, the ones we only used at Christmas. A small thing, but my wife had always insisted on the good plates at Christmas, and I saw no reason to change that. The knock at the door came at 5:47. I know because I looked at the clock on the mantel, the one my wife's mother had given us at our wedding, and I remember thinking they were early. My son was never early for anything in his life. I opened the door, and there they were. My son and his wife, red-cheeked from the cold, smiling in that particular way they had been smiling at me for the past several months, wide and careful, like a smile held in place by something invisible. "Merry Christmas, Dad," my son said, and he hugged me, and it felt the way it always felt lately. Present, but not quite there. His wife kissed my cheek and handed me a bottle of wine I would never open. "We brought Bordeaux," she said, as if that mattered. I took their coats. I poured drinks. We sat in the living room and talked about nothing. The drive over. The weather. A movie they had seen. I watched them the way I had learned to watch them, carefully, quietly, without letting them know I was watching. My son kept glancing at his wife. His wife kept glancing at her phone. Dinner was good. I had made pot roast, a recipe I had been cooking for 40 years. My son had 2 helpings and complimented the potatoes, which meant he was nervous and trying to soften something. He only ever compliments the potatoes when he wants something. After dinner, we moved back to the living room. I put another log on the fire. The snow was still coming down outside, heavier now. My son sat forward on the couch with his elbows on his knees, and I knew the moment had arrived, whatever the moment was going to be. "Dad," he said, "we've been thinking." "Have you?" I said. "About you. About the house. About the future." His wife reached over and put her hand on his arm, which I had come to understand was her signal that she approved of what he was saying, that she had in fact rehearsed it with him. "You're 68, my son said, as if I were unaware of my own age. "The house is big. The maintenance alone. I manage fine." "You do. You really do. But we've been talking to some people." He paused. "Some professionals. About options." I looked at him. "What kind of options?" His wife leaned forward then, and she had a particular brightness in her eyes that I had learned to distrust. "There's a place," she said, "in Scottsdale. It's beautiful. We've actually been out to visit, just to look, just to see. Private rooms, a pool. They have woodworking classes." She said this last part as if woodworking classes were the clincher, as if the promise of making birdhouses with strangers would make me pack my bags willingly. "You want me to move to Arizona?" I said. "Not want. We just think. You've already visited." A pause. My son looked at the fireplace. "We just wanted to do our due diligence." Before bringing it up, I picked up my coffee cup and held it in both hands, letting the warmth come through the ceramic. The fire crackled. The clock on the mantel ticked. Outside, the snow kept falling on the yard I had mowed every summer for 31 years. "And the house?" I said. "We'd handle everything. You wouldn't have to worry about any of it." There it was. I nodded slowly, as if I were considering this, as if it were new information, as if I had not been waiting for this exact conversation for 4 months. Ever since the afternoon I came home early from my cardiologist appointment and found my son's car in the driveway when he was supposed to be at work, and heard them moving through the upstairs rooms, and stood very still in the front hallway listening to them talk in the hushed voices people use when they believe they are alone. That had been August. The leaves were still green. I had stood in my own front hallway and listened to my son and his wife walk through my bedroom, my study, the guest room where I still kept my wife's quilting fabric in a cedar chest because I could not bring myself to move it. I heard his wife say the master suite was a good size. I heard my son say something about the lot, about the square footage, about the neighborhood. I heard his wife say that the market was strong right now, that they should not wait too long. I had walked back out to my car. I sat in the driveway for 20 minutes. Then I drove to the office of a man I had known for 30 years, a man who had handled my business contracts, my wife's estate, and every significant piece of paper in my adult life. I need to talk to you, I said, about my house and about my son. That was August. By October, everything was in order. But sitting in my living room on Christmas Eve with the fire going and the good plates still in the dish rack and my son looking at me with that wide, careful smile, I let him think I was hearing this for the first time. I let his wife talk about Scottsdale and the woodworking classes and the pool. I asked a few questions, practical ones, and watched them both relax incrementally with each question, mistaking my calm for agreement. There would be paperwork, my son said eventually, for the house. We'd need you to sign some things, his wife finished. Right. It's just logistics, really. Of course, I said. I understand. My son smiled, and this time, the smile was real, and something about that was harder to look at than the fake ones. They stayed another hour. We watched part of a Christmas film that none of us were paying attention to. When they finally stood to leave, my son squeezed my shoulder at the door and said he loved me, and I believe he meant it. In whatever diminished way, he had convinced himself love could coexist with what he was doing. I watched their headlights disappear down the street. Then I went to my study, sat at my desk, and looked at the folder that had been sitting in the bottom drawer since October. I want to tell you something about myself before I continue, because I think it matters. I am not a dramatic man. I am not a man who enjoys conflict or confrontation, or the satisfaction of watching someone squirm. I spent 35 years as a civil engineer. I built bridges. Literally. I believe in load-bearing calculations and structural integrity, and doing the math before you pour the concrete. I believe that a problem, properly understood, is already half solved. My wife used to say I was the least impulsive person she had ever met. She meant it as a compliment. Mostly, when she died 3 years ago, pancreatic cancer. 11 months from diagnosis to the end, I grieved quietly, steadily, and completely. I handled her affairs with precision and care, because that was what she would have wanted, and because it was the only thing I could think to do with my hands while my heart was occupied elsewhere. My son had been attentive in those first months. He called often. He came to visit. He helped me sort through her things, or at least he sat with me while I sorted through her things, which is a different thing but still meaningful. I was grateful. Then, gradually, the calls became less frequent. The visits, shorter. I told myself this was natural. He had his own life, his own pressures. His wife had never been warm toward me, but she was civil, and I asked for nothing more. It was only looking back later that I could trace when the visits changed, when they stopped being visits and started being assessments. When the questions shifted from, "How are you?" to "How is the house?" and "Do you need help managing things?" And "Have you thought about simplifying your life?" The house was paid off. My wife and I had been careful with money our entire lives. I had a pension, a portfolio, the house. I was not a wealthy man by most measures, but I was comfortable, and I was stable. And to people who are neither of those things, stability in someone else can look like an opportunity. I am not saying my son is a bad person. I have thought about this longer and harder than most fathers should have to, and my conclusion is that he is a weak person, and that weakness in the presence of a certain kind of influence becomes something that looks an awful lot like bad. His wife is the influence. I had understood that too, by August. In the weeks after I stood in my driveway listening to my heartbeat slow back to normal, I began to pay closer attention. I noticed the way she steered conversations, the way she positioned herself between my son and me, not physically but in every other way, answering questions I had directed at him, summarizing his thoughts before he had finished having them. I noticed the way she talked about the house as if it were already something other than my home, a property, an asset. I noticed that my son had stopped disagreeing with her about anything. In October, when my attorney had finished with the paperwork, I also did several other things. I changed the beneficiary designations on my accounts. I documented every significant interaction I had with my son and his wife for the previous 6 months, dates, and summaries, kept in a second folder in a fireproof safe in the closet. I had a long, honest conversation with my doctor about my health, which is good, and about my cognitive capacity, which is excellent, and I asked him to note in my records that I had come in voluntarily to discuss my estate planning and that I had demonstrated full and clear understanding of my affairs. He looked at me with some concern and asked if everything was all right. "It will be," I said. After Christmas Eve, they gave me 2 weeks before my son called. "Dad, have you had a chance to think more about what we discussed?" "I have," I said. "I have some questions about the paperwork you mentioned." Relief in his voice. "Of course. Whatever you need. We can come over this weekend. We can walk you through everything." "Actually," I said, "I'd like to meet at my attorney's office." A pause. "Your attorney?" "I have some things I want to review with him. It would make me more comfortable to have him present when I sign anything." A longer pause. "Dad, it's really just standard." "I'm sure it is," I said pleasantly. "Then there won't be any problem with me having him look it over." Another pause. "Right. Of course. Whatever you're comfortable with." "Is in." "Right. Right. 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 Right." They came on a Saturday morning in January. My son and his wife, dressed in clothes that suggested they had put some thought into appearing trustworthy. My attorney's office was downtown, the 3rd floor of a building he had occupied for 25 years, with tall windows and the kind of carpet that makes every footstep sound deliberate. I was already there when they arrived. My attorney was already there. And the third person in the room was a woman I had called in December, after doing some research. A specialist in elder law whose name I had found through my doctor's office. My son's wife stopped in the doorway when she saw them. A fraction of a second, barely visible. My son recovered faster. He shook hands. He smiled. He sat down. My attorney set a folder on the table. "Before we look at anything you've brought," he said, "I'd like to review some things we've prepared." What followed was not dramatic in the way of movies or stories where people yell and tables are turned. It was methodical. My attorney walked through what I had done in October. The revisions to my estate documents. The irrevocable trust into which I had transferred the house. The house was no longer in my name, technically, and had not been since October 15th, and could not be sold or transferred or leveraged without conditions that neither my son nor his wife would ever meet in any scenario I could imagine. He walked through the accounts, the beneficiaries, the documented timeline. My son's wife was very still during all of this. She was a woman who had always reminded me of something tightly wound, controlled in a way that required effort. And I could see the effort now, the visible work of remaining composed. My son had gone pale. He was looking at me in a way I had not seen before, confront-lift. And I realized after a moment that it was the look of someone who has been caught, and who does not yet know what being caught will cost them. "I don't understand," my son said, which was not true. He understood perfectly. "The house is in trust," my attorney said. "It has been since October. The terms are specific, and the documentation is thorough. There is nothing here to sign with respect to the property, because the property, as you were apparently anticipating it, does not exist in that form. We weren't my son started. The Scottsdale facility." My elder law attorney spoke for the first time, quietly, not unkindly. We pulled the records. The deposit was made in September, 2 months before Christmas. The room was very quiet. Outside the tall windows, the January sky was the pale gray of old concrete. I looked at my son. I want to be precise about this, because the precision matters to me. I did not look at him with triumph. I did not feel triumph. What I felt was a deep and specific sadness, the kind that does not arrive all at once, but has been settling for months. I looked at my son, and I saw the boy he had been, the young man he had become, and then the man sitting across from me, who had driven to my house in August while I was at a doctor's appointment to walk through my rooms and calculate what they were worth. "Dad," he said. His voice was different now, smaller. "I love you," I said. "I want you to understand that that is not in question. But I am not confused. I am not fragile. I am not a problem that needs to be managed." I paused. "I am your father. And I have been paying attention." His wife had not spoken. She was looking at the folder on the table, as if it were something she could revise. "There are some additional documents," my attorney said, "related to the power of attorney that was in preparation. We became aware of that through certain communications. And I want to be very clear that any attempt to advance that process will be met with the full legal response available to us." He said this pleasantly, in the same tone he might use to discuss the weather. My son looked at his wife. His wife did not look back at him. "I want to tell you what happened next. Not because it ended well in every sense, but because the truth of it matters." My son cried in the parking lot, not in the office, not where his wife could see him in a way that would require her to respond to it, but in the parking lot after she had gotten into the car and was looking at her phone. He stood by the rear bumper in the January cold and he cried in the way that men who rarely cry do it badly, effortfully, with a kind of physical resistance to the whole process. I stood with him for a few minutes. I did not say anything immediately. The cold was clean and sharp, the sky colorless above the buildings. "She said it was practical," he said finally. "She said it made sense. She said you'd be better off." "I know what she said," I told him. "I want to know what you said." He didn't answer for a long time. I said, "Okay," he said. That was the honest answer, and I respected him for giving it. I said, "Okay." The most corrosive 3 words in a long marriage. I did not forgive him that day. Forgiveness, in my experience, is not a single event but a long project, and I was not ready to begin it yet. What I told him was that I was willing to have a conversation, a real one, not a managed one, at some point in the future. Without his wife present, initially, about what had happened and why, about what he actually needed that he had convinced himself my house would provide. He nodded. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. "The woodworking classes," I said. "Was that her idea?" He almost smiled. "She read it on the website. I have a perfectly good workshop in the basement." He nodded again. "Come in the spring," I said. "We'll build something." I drove home. The house was quiet in the way houses are quiet in January. Settled into itself. Unhurried. I made coffee and sat in the kitchen where 31 Christmases of good plates and pine smell, and my wife's baking lived in the walls, and I thought about what it costs to know your own child clearly. The cost is real. Anyone who tells you otherwise has not paid it. But I also thought about the other thing. The thing my attorney had said when we first talked in August, when I had walked into his office with my face arranged carefully and told him what I had heard in my own hallway. He had listened without interrupting, which was why I had used him for 30 years. When I finished, he had been quiet for a moment. "What do you want the outcome to be?" he asked. I thought about it. "I want to stay in my house," I said. "I want to be difficult to deceive, and I want my son to have to live with the knowledge of what he was willing to do." "That last one," my attorney said, "you can't engineer. That's between him and himself." He was right. It still is. But I had handled the things I could handle, and the things I could not, I had learned, over 68 years and one profound loss, to set down and walk away from. The house is mine. The trust is structured to pass to a charitable foundation I designated, a small scholarship fund in my wife's name at the engineering school where we met, if I die, before my son demonstrates the kind of person he is capable of being. That is an invitation. What people like my son's wife do not understand, what greed, specifically, prevents people from understanding, is that the things worth having are not transferred by paperwork. They are not in the deed or the account statements or the square footage. My wife knew that. I knew it on the day we moved in, when the house was empty and we sat on the floor of the living room and ate sandwiches out of paper bags because we didn't own a table yet, and I looked at her and thought that, whatever we were about to build here, the building was the point. They thought the house was the prize. The house was never the prize. I go out to the workshop most mornings now. I am making a blanket chest. Oak and cherry. Joinery I learned from a book my wife gave me for my 55th birthday. It is taking longer than I expected. Most things worth doing do. In April, my son came over. We did not talk very much, not about anything important. We worked side by side in the shop for 3 hours and built the frame for a small bookshelf and disagreed about the finish, and both believed we were right. He stayed for dinner. He did not bring his wife. When he left, he stood at the door for a moment. "She's not wrong about everything," he said. He meant his wife. He was asking me something. "I know," I said. "But she was wrong about this. And you knew it. That's the part you have to decide what to do with." He nodded. He went home. The conversation we are still having, the one that matters, has no clear ending yet. I am not in a hurry. So have a dawn. This is one of they. The Constidon said. I my 7 dawn said. I'm not in a hurry. I have learned, at 68, that the most important things do not conclude. They continue. My name is not important. I am a retired engineer. I am a widower. I am a man who built something and intends to keep it. I am a father still, despite everything, waiting to see what my son decides to become. The blanket chest is almost finished. I think my wife would like it.